Welcome to another episode of Genealogy is Fun, and today I'll be talking about the four main types of DNA that you can test for and what they can tell you about your past. Now, if you've been doing genealogy for a while, you've probably either taken or at least considered taking a DNA test, and it can be kind of confusing when you go online and you see just how many different companies and types of tests there are. And so I think the best way to learn about DNA, like with anything, is to break it down step by step. And today we're going to be just talking about the basics of four different types of DNA testing: autosomal, xDNA, y-DNA, and mitochondrial DNA. Each of these has a different way that you can test for it, and they can tell you different things about your ancestors. So without further ado, my name is Yona Paley. I believe genealogy is fun, and today, let's talk about DNA. Autosomal DNA is by far the most common type of DNA to test for, and there are a number of sites where you can buy this test. You have Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, Living DNA, and they all pretty much do the same thing. But because of the fact that Ancestry and 23andMe don't allow you to upload your results from another site, I highly recommend starting with one of those two. Ideally Ancestry, because I think they have the biggest DNA database and also they have some pretty solid tools. But either way, what you want to do is test with one of these and then upload them to as many sites as possible to analyze. Now, what is autosomal DNA? Well, you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and one set of them are your sex chromosomes. The other 22 of them are your autosomes. And what these contain is genetic information from a number of ancestors going back several generations. Now, because of the fact that inheritance is somewhat random, an autosomal test contains information going back about, on average, 5 to 7 generations. And if you think about it, you inherit half of your DNA from each of your parents, they inherit half of their DNA from each of their parents, and so on and so forth. By the time you get to multiple generations out, the amount of DNA that you're going to share with, say, your 5th, 6th, 7th great grandparents is negligible. Not just negligible, but the whole idea is that you're trying to compare your results to other people who have tested. You know, the odds of you sharing the same 1 in 128 chunk of DNA with each other is negligible. So autosomal DNA can tell you a lot about your genetic makeup. It can tell you a lot about your immediate cousins and family. And it can be really useful for solving brick walls, especially when it comes to unknown parentages. If somebody was adopted or things like that, well, you might be able to learn who the family is just by taking this test. You can also find some distant cousins, especially if you have built out a really good paper trail. And because of the fact that it encompasses your entire autosomal DNA, this is why it's the most common, the most popular type of test. You're always going to want to start here when you're getting into genetic genealogy. Tests go from between $50 to $150, and you should always keep your eyes peeled for holiday deals and specials. So what can you do to maximize your results from autosomal DNA testing? Well, first and foremost, you're always going to want to test the oldest people genetically on your lineage. So let's say you're researching your grandfather's family. If your grandfather is alive and is willing to take a DNA test, his DNA results are going to be way more powerful than yours because he's more closely related to your shared ancestor. And so you're always going to want to seek out the oldest people that you can who are willing to take a test, be it uncles, aunts, cousins. If your father is the line that you're trying to research and he's taken a test, your test isn't going to yield any additional results because you only inherited 50% of your father's DNA, whereas he has 100% of his DNA. So just keep that in mind when you're doing the tests. You also, as I had mentioned just before, want to upload to as many websites as possible. So maximize them all. There's of course the ones that offer tests that allow you to also upload to another site. But there is also a website called GEDmatch, which you can upload to for more in-depth DNA analysis. So upload to as many sites as you can. Try to test as many relatives as you can. By doing this, you'll be able to fill in some of the missing gaps. Let's talk about the next kind, which is probably the least talked about, which is xDNA. And I will admit that xDNA was something that I struggled with for a very long time, and this is because of the fact that the inheritance patterns are kind of weird. I recently attended the IAJGS convention and heard an amazing lecture from Adina Newman about xDNA, and it helped to clarify certain things. So let's talk about, first of all, what it is. Well, I mentioned before that out of your 23 sets of chromosomes, one set are your sex chromosomes. And for women, people who are born genetically female, they have two X chromosomes. And for people who are born genetically male, they have one X and one Y chromosome. So as you can see, the X chromosome is more common than the Y chromosome because everybody has X chromosomes. So if you're a woman, you inherit one of your xDNA chromosomes from your father and one of them from your mother. But you might be asking, well, a guy only has one X chromosome. So of course, the one he passes on to his daughter, well, he just passes along the chromosome. But what about when a woman passes an X chromosome to another woman? Which of the two of them gets passed along? And the answer is it's complicated. Usually it's some sort of combination of the two. Rarely it can be one or the other. You can never really know up until you analyze xDNA whether maybe an entire chromosome was passed or whether it was mixed. But what you can know is that the X chromosome from the dad is the full X chromosome. For guys who only have one X chromosome, they do not inherit it from the father. They inherit it from the mother, following a similar type of random pattern of probably a mix of the two X chromosomes, but it could also be a full one or the other in rare situations. There is no test specifically for xDNA. In fact, when you take an autosomal test, it captures your xDNA, and there are currently two main websites that let you go in depth on your xDNA, those being Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch, both of which allow you to upload other kits. And you can usually sort by shared amount of centimorgans along the X chromosome, and you can analyze that and compare that to your other matches. What does the inheritance pattern allow you to do? Well, if you think about it, it allows you to play the game of process of elimination. Guys inherit their X chromosome from their mother, which means that if you share a significant amount of xDNA with a match, it had to have come along your mother's line. So it allows you to eliminate various lines in terms of figuring out how you're related to them. And then you can also use this going back further generations. For instance, let's say your sister shares xDNA with a match. That could come from either your father's or your mother's line, because she has two X chromosomes, one from the father, one from the mother. But where we know that it cannot come from is from her father's father. Because even if she inherited DNA, xDNA from her father, well, her grandfather would not have passed xDNA on to his son because of the fact that guys don't pass xDNA down to other guys. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, but you can kind of see if you take a look at the inheritance possibilities that you can start to eliminate certain lines. And this works in your favor, especially if you're trying to trace an uncertain parentage and you happen to get a really good xDNA match. While it is not as cut and dry or easy to analyze as autosomal DNA, it is a very useful tool to add to your toolbox because of the unique inheritance pattern. Now, once again, this is one that I have struggled with for a while, so if I missed anything or misrepresented anything about xDNA, let me know in the comment section below. So now we've talked about the X chromosome. What about the other sex chromosome, your Y chromosome? Well, this is unique and pretty easy to understand because the Y chromosome is simply passed along from father to son. Women do not have a Y chromosome, and in fact, guys pass it down only to their male descendants, meaning when you test for your Y chromosome, you can learn genetic information about your direct paternal line going back thousands of years because this type of DNA mutates very slowly. And you can learn about your haplogroup or haplotype, which is simply a collection of shared traits that exist among various groups of people. From this, you can look at maps that show you migration patterns of where your ancestors originally came from thousands of years ago. It can also tell you whether you share a direct patrilineal ancestor with somebody by analyzing the matches. But there's a caveat to this, which is that you have way fewer people on that one line than, let's say, when you took an autosomal test and you're testing thousands of ancestors. With your Y-DNA test, you're only testing that one line. So the odds of you having a match close enough in time to where you can figure out exactly how you're related to them are on the low side, but especially if you come from a lineage that has had the same surname for a very long time, you might be able to discover a relative of yours just from seeing a shared surname pop up on this match, because you know that you definitely descend from that same ancestor. Another thing that it can be used for, of course, is for non-paternity events. If you want to figure out who the father is, well, being on the same Y-DNA line as somebody, especially if it's a direct match, is going to be a very powerful tool for you. The gold standard for Y-DNA testing is family tree DNA, which offers tests based on the precision and number of segments that they will test for along your Y chromosome. And you can get tests ranging from 20s and 30s all the way up to their big Y700 test, which is like the cream of the crop when it comes to taking a Y-DNA test. Now this can run hundreds of dollars, but keep your eyes peeled out, especially around Father's Day and other holidays. They will run offers, and in fact, if you've taken one of the smaller tests, they will usually allow you to upgrade to a better test for an upgrade fee. So you can start off by taking one of the less expensive ones, upgrade it as you find that it might yield some additional fruit. Now, if you're a woman who's doing genealogy, you might think that Y-DNA tests don't have any sort of utility for you, but this is absolutely not the case. By thinking creatively, you can test a brother, an uncle, any male relative along the line that you're researching, and this is a great way to uncover a line that maybe you can't test for yourself, but if you have someone alive who is along that line, well, they're going to share the same Y-DNA with their direct paternal ancestor. So by testing as many people as possible, I know I'm repeating this over and over again, but it is really key to maximizing your results. Which brings us to the last type of DNA, which is mitochondrial DNA. And this one's very different. It's not exactly a part of your 23 chromosomes. Rather, it lives within the mitochondria of the cell, but is passed down in a very specific way from a mother to her children. And that's all children, male or female. But only women pass it down. And so if you're a guy, you have mitochondrial DNA, but you will not pass it along to your children. So what mitochondrial DNA tests allow you to do is test for essentially the opposite of a Y-DNA test, the direct matrilineal line. You can test the mother's mother's mother, also going back thousands of years, and this is also an incredible tool, but the big caveat when it comes to mitochondrial DNA testing, also available by the way through Family Tree DNA, running about $150 for the test. The issue is if there's a surname that's been around for a while with Y-DNA, well, you can use that to uncover a relative. With mitochondrial DNA, you need to have a really good paper trail because women often change their last name when they get married. And so if you're testing back, 8 generations along your direct matrilineal line, you need to know what your mother's maiden name was, what her mother's maiden name was, what her mother's maiden name was, and so on and so forth. So this is probably the toughest one to be of utility because you really need to have an amazing paper trail along that line. But if you do, it is an incredible tool to add to your toolbox. So in conclusion, these are the 4 types of DNA tests that you can use for genealogy: autosomal, X, Y, and mitochondrial, each serving its own function. You really can't take too many tests, and you really can't have too many people take tests. So I know it can get expensive, but the more people you can get these tests, the more comprehensive your genetic research will be. So anyways, I hope you found this informative. If you have any comments, leave it in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.